From Darshan Studios, it's Zinc Comics Unleashed with your host, Brian Payne. That's me. A strange dichotomy exists between many cartoonists, comic book fans, and the industry itself. The sad fact is that comics equal superheroes in many folks' mind, and that can indeed be problematic. I've tried to combat this notion at every opportunity myself, because I definitely believe that comics is a unique art form that has unlimited potential for personal self-expression. I can also definitely understand why some comic artists don't like superheroes, but I still can't understand the total disdain and derision some have for the cape and mask crowd. Personally, I kind of like superheroes, and especially those from the Golden Age. And in my opinion, the last thing I should be doing is autobio or an in-depth comic biography of Anais Nin. However, I willingly admit there is no great need for yet another superhero comic either. I've tried my hand at every genre of comic at some point, be it funny animal, western, science fiction, soap opera, and yes, even the ever-popular autobio and historical biography. However, even though I always liked superheroes, I had almost subconsciously been avoiding them, as if they were not only a love that should not be named, but ever drawn as well. Once I came to this conclusion, I decided it was time for me to come out of the closet with my underwear on the outside and mask on. This is why I'm currently creating my own superhero comics. Now, on with the show. This week, I'm hanging out in the studio with Dean Westerino, Carson Grubaugh, David Branstetter, Steve Peters, and Bianca Alu-Marr. Welcome to the show, folks.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, Brian.
This
Hello.
week, I feel like I've been a good host and given everybody their moment to introduce themselves. So this week, we're going to kind of flip the script and let me talk about my comics for a bit. And as Dean has confessed that my comics sometimes confound him, I feel like I should allow him to ask me a few questions and see if we can confound him further, or at least, or perhaps even clear up the confusion a little. So without further ado, Dean, what you got? Come at me.
I didn't write down specific questions as much as just points that I would like you to elaborate on, I guess.
Sure.
And I don't know how much you're going to unconfound me, but that's part of the fun of the books, the fun of your work. So, I mean, I think we ought to start with Red Mosquito. And you brought up superheroes, and that was the first thing I wrote. Just what was, I guess my question is, or my point is, like, I think you kind of explained it in the introduction, but what are you doing with these superheroes? These superheroes are in Alaska. They're Alaskan characters. I also see them as somehow intermingling with other cultures. I find your work not only elusive, but they're elusive. You have a lot of references to culture, literature. So if you like to talk about superheroes and maybe bring in some of that, the illusion that you use with that, with the Red Mosquito.
Yeah, sure. One thing with my storytelling is that early on, I decided to pursue, for better or worse, to me, life isn't linear, and stories don't come at you with a beginning, middle, and end. So I've been trying my entire career, I've been doing something that I refer to as peripheral storytelling. And it's where I kind of like lay out stuff and let it come at you sideways rather than hitting you head on. With Red Mosquito, all my comics have been like informed by where I lived. And I've always, as I confessed earlier to you, I've always liked the newspaper strip more than the comic book. And when I moved to Homer, I was trying to get a comic strip in the local paper. I thought it was a small town. I knew some of the people at the paper. I thought I had a chance. So I drew Cosmic Hamlet. which is Homer is referred to as the cosmic Hamlet by the sea. So I thought, okay, well, that's a great name for a comic. And I came up with this newspaper strip, and I was drawing them like as if they were Sunday comic strips. In that comic, it was more of a soap opera strip in my mind. That's what I was going for, was not so much Spider-Man as Rex Morgan, MD. And but I was also at that time fascinated by the real superhero movement, where they have like Phoenix Jones running around in tights in Portland or wherever that was.
Right.
And so I thought, as comic relief, I would add a superhero, and that was the Red Mosquito. Then after the strips started appearing, they appeared in an anthology originally here in Alaska called Sow's Ear, and everyone would always refer to it as Red Mosquito. It was like the other characters didn't exist. It's like everybody latched onto Red Mosquito. And then
I was just going to chip in there. I assume that is because the Red Mosquito, it's for me at least, it was the easiest one to get my head around. When I looked at, like, is it Major Arcana? You know, that one's a little more elusive and a little more difficult to get my head around because you're using other stories incorporated with it. So I can see why the Red Mosquito rose to the top there.
Those the Major Arcana, Blue Call, and were actually separate entities. They were kind of like pilots, I considered them. They were like testing out ideas to see if this is something I wanted to do. And it was a Halloween themed paper, so that's why I went with that. And the reason I came back to Red Mosquito is that I was approached to be part of a shared universe of Alaskan superheroes.
Oh, okay.
So I thought, well, I've got Red Mosquito waiting in the wings. So I was told, let's do that. I was told they would be publishing it and that they'd be doing it in color. I even talked to David Branstetter about hiring him to do the color. And I even drew some panels just so he'd have something to really go all out on. And unfortunately, I feel like I've been Plutoed from that project. I feel like I'm in my own universe rather than part of the shared universe now. And that's why I purposely made it more Alaska centric, the comic book, and made references to some of their comics that, you know, I don't know.
Would I recognize those references? Like, what are the references to their comics? I didn't really notice that necessarily.
Yeah. FF187 or whatever is one of the shared universe comics. Redoubt City is a city that they reference in one of their comics. Okay. I was trying to be part of this shared universe. I really thought that was a great idea. But it seemed like I was the only one who realized, okay, we've got a year. It's going to take me a year to draw a comic. So I immediately started work on it, and I kept talking to them the whole time. And, you know, I got my comic done, and right now it seems like they're rushing to get theirs done. There might be one finish, maybe two, but they're talking about a 10-issue series, and Red Mosquito is not mentioned. Yes. Fortunately, in Alaska, we get money just for living here each year. It's called the permanent fund dividend. So you get a check each year. It's part of the oil money that they get from Alaska, and they share it with the citizens. So I've been using my permanent fund check each year as like an art grant, and that funded my newspapers, my new comic book. So I feel like it's mad money. You know, it's not coming out of my savings. So I feel like I can do that. That's probably more than you needed to know, but there you go.
No, it helps. Another kind of just general question, like reading through Red Mosquito, the newspapers. You use a lot of illusions. Like for instance, in Major Arcana, it's basically you're playing around with Luis Borges, who wrote a book of a collection called The Labyrinth, which then ties into is it Theseus and the Labyrinth and the Minotaur? Is it Theseus? Am I getting that right name?
You're asking the wrong guy. English is the second language.
You're tying into the Minotaur with that, and then Star Wars, because you got that character that looks like Darth Maul. And I'm just kind of, and then you got the is it? Oh, I can't read my writing. You have the other character that uses I think it's Midnight. Is it Midnight Ace?
Midnight Agents. The Midnight Agents.
Shakespeare. It's got Aztec or Mexican mythology. It's got some Japanese, which might be maybe no. Like what are you doing with all these different cultural points and bringing them into these little strips you're doing? What's your larger purpose there? If I dare ask.
A little bit of knowledge is dangerous in the wrong hands. That's all I can say.
Well, I think they're in the right hands. Come on.
These are the things that I find interesting, and just I think comics have always used mythology. The comics is a mythology. Superheroes are a mythology, but they've always used references to Shakespeare, to Greek myth, so I'm kind of playing on that. But once you get the idea of doing a story set in a labyrinth, you immediately have to think of Theseus. And then I thought of that other book. I can't enunciate the author's name, but you did.
I believe it's Borges.
Yeah, and it's actually a short story, I think. But I thought of that too, and I thought, well, that's just the way my mind works. I kind of I think it's they say steal from everybody, but be honest with your theft, and that way it will be pure, or something. I'm mutilating the quote somewhat, but that's kind of what I'm doing. And for me, that story was a short little vignette, which is the way I tend to work. I don't plan out long stories. I do little vignettes, then connect them to other things, and they hopefully form a cohesive whole at the end.
Reading all the Cosmic Hamlets together, you're obviously are making those connections and dropping those little seeds in there that I could see you spinning off. For instance, that one panel where somebody asks about the origins of the Red Mosquito, and you see mosquitoes coming in, you see the Buddhist on fire. So you're dropping the seeds, and of course Ulysses St. Augustine, I guess, coming from the sea, being gone for 10 years, and your memory's wiped out. Like, you're obviously planting seeds that if you want to spin these off, you can. I think that's kind of cool. That's fun.
Well, with the newspaper strip, I was laying broad strokes and trying to make it out to be something I could continue indefinitely. Once that didn't happen, I published it as the newspaper just because that's where it was intended to be, was on newsprint. And I found a publisher here in Alaska that allowed for newsprint printing, and the old-fashioned way, where you actually shot with a camera and made negatives and stuff. So I wanted to take advantage of that. Since then, they've gone digital, of course. And then when I got the chance to do the comic book, I was trying to wrap up some of those broad strokes and make them, okay, that's that, and make it make sense. But with the origin, I didn't want to lay it all out. I wanted to leave that a little bit mysterious. So
it was a great panel, definitely. it evoked lots of things I really liked. So I don't care if there's any payoff in it. It was a great panel.
Brian.
Yes.
I got a question for you. You seem to use you and Skywalker as models in your work quite often. And as a reader, I look at it and I kind of go, hey, you know, I kind of remember the faces, but I don't remember like the stories element so much. So they almost have their own connectivity, even though they're like wearing different disguises almost. It's like, do you know what I'm saying? Or
yeah, I do. What I think of it is like we're like starring in different movies. You know, when you see Clint Eastwood in this movie or that movie, it's still Clint Eastwood, but it's also that character. And there's an old movie with, I think it's Glenn Ford and perhaps Audrey Hepburn. I'm not sure about the actress, but it's a screenwriter, and he's in he's trying to write a screenplay, and he keeps writing these scenarios, and then it goes off into these movies where they're the characters in that scenario, and then he tears that one up and starts another, and that's also it. And another thing is just practicality. You know, if I had more friends, my cast would be larger. But the only two I can really count on is myself and my wife to put up with my shenanigans. And that's one reason why in Midnight Agents I started buying masks, so I could be multiple characters without.
I was going to ask you about that. You use a lot of masks, and now it just totally makes sense to me because you're using photo reference and you're just creating. No, it just totally fell in place because your metaphor of it being a movie and using Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood's larger as an actor than he is with his characters, and you guys are becoming, as David said, you know, you're across all these stories. Putting on the mask allows you to be other people. That just like clicked with me. I was going to ask you about the mask. Yeah, that makes total sense to me now.
Garrett Spencer Millage was a big influence on me, and he had a cast in Strange Haven, and Cosmic Hamlet was very much my Strange Haven. And then there's a bloke called Glenn Brewer. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with him. He did a comic called Ascara Hadari, and I'm probably mutilating that, but he had a cast, and I really liked that aspect of it, where it was like, you know, you're not trying to get a likeness, you've got a likeness, and you know these characters. And I like the idea of being, you know, multiple movies as well. So
yeah.
Okay, there's one. I've been eating up a lot of time here, so before I eat up the entire show, I do want to talk about two things. First off, I want to talk about Midnight Agents. Midnight Agents, as you allude to, is one of the strips that appeared in my second newspaper collection. And the story has one character, the tragic hero. And I also did a story for David Branstetter's Strawman 10 that had Sin Hombre, my masked luchador, sitting in a hotel room reading a Bible, and it became a Bible story. And
so now you're Jesus, Brian.
What's that?
I said, so now you're Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus H too, right? That's the other story.
I did do that. Yeah. Well, you know, you can take the Catholic boy out of the church, but you can't take the church out of the Catholic boy.
Unfortunately.
Anyway, Midnight Agents is something that, again, started as a newspaper strip idea, and quite a long time ago. I've been working on this in little fits and starts for years. Currently, I have 4 32-page comics sitting on the shelf waiting to be inked.
What? 4 32 pages? Oh my gosh, I didn't know this.
Wow.
Yeah, so my plan is to ink an issue per year, put it out with the dividend check each year, and my 5-year plan is in 4 years to have 120 some odd pages of Midnight Agents done. Yeah, it's been a project that has been near and dear to my heart for a long time, but I keep going off on tangents and doing other things. And I thought this Red Mosquito shared universe was too good of an opportunity to pass up. So I went with that. And that's the odd thing is Red Mosquito is my newest work. Now I got to go back to stories I've that are almost 8 years old, some of them, some even 10 years old, and some that I just drew last week. So it's going to be interesting, but I'm getting ready to start inking the next issue any day now. So anyway.
Well, your art style, I mean, because I just sat today and I went through everything, and I sat with Jeff and looked at the print material that I have, and I looked at everything I could online. It's pretty damn consistent. I mean, I haven't read anything that old, but I think we have the, what was it called, Vicious Toys or something like that.
Lost Toys. Yeah.
But you know, that the art style's a little different there, but I don't think you're gonna have to do a heck of a lot of redrawing. I think you're gonna be all right with that.
Okay, David, you were saying.
I was gonna say the Vincent Van Gogh stuff, but I like the idea of the story, but the pencils I think are a little rough. I think the style is a little bit rough at that point because you're not using photo reference totally, and where you're not doing that, I think that's where it kind of, doesn't quite live up to the other work.
Early on, I did not want to trace photos. I used photo reference, but I drew it freehand. So you got an astute observation. And Vincent Van Gogh was actually one of the first things I did.
I've never seen that.
And it's basically the Van Gogh letters. It's a 24-page comic over 2 digests. I used to release 16-page digest comics pretty regularly. And the Lost Toys thing you referenced was actually my first 2 comic books. Working in printing, I was afforded the chance to print almost everything I ever did, for good or bad. And with Lost Toys, that's like some of the very first stuff I ever drew. And we went into the print shop after hours and ran like 1,000 copies of a production. And so those are my major works. But anyway, we're almost done with the show, and I apologize for keeping everyone captive audience. I appreciate you reading all my stuff, Dean.
Absolutely, man.
To do that, but at least now you know where I'm coming from. And so
I still have more questions or more things to discuss, but another time.
Yes, another time. And while we're on this subject, I just want to ask, I had a question for Bianca, and this will get her in. Bianca, did you know who I was before Steve suggested you work with me, or did he just say, I know this crazy guy who would be willing to draw your script?
Well, I mean, I think we were Facebook friends before that.
Okay.
So I got a chance to see your posts and your strips, and I was really excited that you were going to be working with us. So yeah, I think I was definitely aware of your work before you started doing something for us.
Okay. I just, we were talking, I was like looking at your icon saying, did she even know who I was before she sent me a script? But I know a lot of that came from Steve, but I'm sure you had the final thumbs up or thumbs down on that, and that was a good experience for me. So okay, let's try and get Steve and Carson into the show. Okay, Carson, I got one thing for you. As I told you before, I'm seeing that actual mock-ups for the Alex Raymond book. Is that still far away, or is it actually going to come to fruition soon?
It's always like a you'd have to ask Dave thing.
Okay.
there's been multiple times where I thought, like, okay, beginning of, like, pretty much every beginning of the year, I think he's going to talk to IDW. And then there's, like, one more thing that needs to get done. Like, right now, there's a promo for a You Don't Know Jack TV show that he's working on or something. And it's like, okay, whatever.
You Don't Know Jack. Will that be a prequel or an epilogue to Alex Raymond, or will it come out concurrent?
It's a prequel that comes out before the book gets a prequel to. The joke is, like, it's a prequel to a book that hasn't come out yet that no one asked for.
Okay. Is that going to come out anytime soon, or again, is that you got to ask Dave?
It's all, he has this idea for this gigantic marketing scaffold, is what he calls it. And until all of the pieces of the scaffold are done, nothing will come out. But then there's always more pieces being added, as far as I can tell.
Okay.
So I just
Carson,
work on it.
how complete is the Alex Raymond story itself? I mean, are we getting close to a finished story as far as, like, wrapping it up, or does he just keep injecting more into it?
Volumes 1 and 2, the interior art's completely done.
Okay.
And as far as I know, there's 2 more volumes to come, and Dave's currently doing commentary and as part of his research for volume 3.
Okay. So we're in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like we've left Steve hanging out to dry. So, Steve, last week I was talking to you about your process, and then in the comments after I posted the show, you made 2 valid points. We only got a couple minutes, but you talked about how for your comic, there is no actual physical page, but each panel is drawn with pen and ink. Can you elaborate on that?
The current comic, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
and the current comic title again
is Comic Verse : Subspace Chatter.
Okay.
It's a spinoff of the Comic Verse.
Okay, gotcha.
They all start with this is a case where a screen share would really help, but they all start with pen and ink drawings, but it's sort of like animation or like color forms, if you remember color forms, where I have a background that I've drawn and I just use it over and over again, and I have like an arsenal of faces and bodies that I just put together digitally. They're drawn in pen and ink, but I assemble the whole thing digitally, so there's no actual physical pages for any of these stories because it's all assembled digitally.
And then those panels that you have your pals draw, you just kind of fit them in digitally as well?
Yeah, and the last couple of stories that we've done, yes.
Right. Okay. And I like how you ask Facebook questions and then get people to answer them and then work the answers into your story.
That's great.
That's really, it's a very interesting and unique idea. And I really want to applaud you for that. I think, I like the longer stories. I prefer them, but that is a nice thing. It's like the pause that refreshes in between the longer stories, I think.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, that does apply to you too, Bianca. We're giving you both props there.
Hey, Steve, when I was about 10 years ago, I was working for somebody and they said, why don't you just like draw a couple pictures and then copy and paste and put it in, and make a page. And I was like, no, I can't do that because that's cheating. And now, like, Dave Sims doing it with Therapist, and you're doing it with that. And I'm like, man, I got to get on this.
Well, it was actually Dave that gave me the idea. In one of his Kickstarters, there was like a call Dave for your Dave calls you on your birthday.
Right.
So I chose that, and we were talking, and he said something along those lines. You have enough drawings of your Converse characters that you could do this, something along those lines. And it turned out that he was working on Service in Hell at the same time, but I didn't know it. It wasn't out yet. But it gave me the idea to try this crazy method.
It's a good idea. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of tonight's show. And I want to thank y'all. I know I kind of bogarted the mic, but I did warn y'all. And next week, I'm going to shut up, and it's going to be our last episode for the season. And it's going to be more freeform, what I imagine the show might be in the future. I hope to see y'all come back next week. Until next time, I'll see you in the comic page.